Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 3-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 16-month-old named Mia. Oftentimes when parents begin implementing Montessori practices at home with their children, one of the first things that they tackle is the physical environment. And that makes perfect sense. It's a very logical place to begin. I know that's certainly where I also began implementing Montessori at home. And oftentimes that tends to be the easiest part of getting started with actually doing Montessori. But doing Montessori at home effectively is not just about the pretty shelves and about all of the neatly organized activities that are very beautifully prepared on these gorgeous wooden trays that draw in your child's attention. That is just step one. Another very important component of Montessori is that interaction piece, what your child is actually doing with the materials and activities that you've set out, and how specifically you are responding to what they're doing with those activities. So from one busy parent to another, today I'm going to be sharing with you how to present a lesson or activity to your child with Montessori principles in mind. So first, it is important to recognize that in a Montessori environment, a child's play or any type of activity that they're engaging in is referred to as work. And that's because to a child, work and play are one and the same. They give the same amount of focus and effort and attention to their play as we would in our own work as adults. And that's because a child is constantly learning through their play. They take every task that they engage in as a learning opportunity. And so because children are learning through their play, and partly because Montessori was originally established as an approach to classroom education, whenever a child is shown how to do something new, we call that presenting the child a new lesson. However, for the purposes of today's video, unless you happen to be a homeschooler who is presenting your child lessons, I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of you are parents at home who are implementing Montessori with your children. And so just to keep things simple, I'm going to be referring to lessons as activities. So a question that many parents often have is, do I have to present all of the activities and toys that my child has to my child before they use it? And the short answer is no. And the reason for that is simple. There are just some toys and activities that you're going to have in your home environment that do not require a presentation. For example, a set of wooden blocks. That does not require an adult to show a child how to use them. All you would need to do in that case is set out the blocks in a box or a basket on the shelf and allow your child to discover them and explore them all on their own. However, there are going to be some activities, especially some of the more traditional Montessori activities, that do require a presentation because they have a very specific sequence of steps and a certain way that the materials are supposed to be used in order for your child to achieve the intended outcome. So it's really going to be up to you as the parent to use your own discretion and really think to yourself, can my child figure this out on their own without making too much of a mess in the process, or maybe perhaps entirely missing the point altogether? And if the answer is yes, they probably could, then it might not require a presentation from you. But for example, if you are doing a water transferring activity or a water pouring activity for the first time with your child, especially if they are much younger, they are likely going to need to be shown at least the first time how to do it. So when you do have an activity that you want to present to your child, there are 5 main guidelines that you should really try to keep in mind if you want to present the activity using a Montessori approach. The first is precision and orderly presentation. You want to have a very clear understanding of how the activity should be done, inside and out. And if necessary, if it's your first time ever engaging with the materials as well, you want to maybe even practice ahead of time as if you were presenting it to your child. This way, by the time your child is sitting in front of you, you know how to do it without mistakes. Because you have to remember, your child is in that absorbent mind stage between the ages of 0 and 6. They're absorbing every little detail, everything that they see. And so if you're kind of fumbling about as you're doing the activity and making mistakes yourself, that is only going to serve to confuse your child, and they're not going to be able to replicate what they saw you doing. The second guideline is few and simple words. One of my favorite Montessorians, Jean-Marie Paynel from Voila Montessori, has an acronym that she constantly refers to that I just love. It's SHOW, which stands for Slow Hands Omit Words. And the slow hands part of it refers to the fact that as adults, we move very quickly, often much more quickly than a child is able to keep up with. So if we are showing our child how to do something for the very first time, they need to be focused on what it is that we're doing with our hands as we're working. They need to be able to see the very fine details of how we're holding certain things and exactly how we're moving our hands to make certain things happen. And so it becomes important for us to consciously slow down our movements so that our child is able to process exactly what it is that they're seeing at a speed that they can handle. The second part of that acronym, omit words, is also very important because as adults, we are very accustomed to following someone else's verbal instructions to be able to do something or giving verbal instructions. And we have to remember that for a young child, that's just not their primary mode of learning. They really need to be able to see something and try it out for themselves many times over before they get it. And so we have to remember consciously as we're presenting to our child to try to not really talk a whole lot, if at all, if we can avoid it. The other primary reason for omitting words is that when we're talking, especially with young children who are just learning how to talk themselves, they are often very attuned to our mouths. So they're looking at our faces and they're looking at our lips as we're talking to help themselves process the language. And so if we're talking the whole time, they're going to be distracted. They're going to want to look up and look at our mouths to see what we're saying instead of looking at the materials and looking at what we're trying to show them. So when you're presenting an activity, remember to slow down your movements and try to use as few words as possible. The third guideline is invite your child. After you have completed the entire sequence of the activity, including breaking it down again for your child to start fresh with it, you can then turn to your child and say, now you take a turn pouring the water from the pitcher to the cup, or whatever the activity is. At this point, your child is probably very excited about having a chance to get those materials in their hands and try to repeat what it is that they saw you doing. And that leads me to the fourth guideline, which is to observe and don't interrupt. Your job is to simply observe your child as they begin working with the activity to see if they're even interested in it at all, and if they are interested, exactly how they're using the materials, what it is about the activity that seems to be drawing their interest and engagement, what kind of facial expression they have. You're really paying attention to all of the little details. And the reason you're doing this is because you're trying to gain information. From Dr. Montessori's perspective, every lesson is an experiment. You are just showing the child how to do something and then you're watching to see how they respond, because this ultimately is going to help you decide whether or not the activity is developmentally appropriate if you weren't sure, or if your child is really even truly engaged by it at all, because sometimes we make mistakes when it comes to determining what a child might be interested in or not. You might also be able to tell if the activity is too easy for your child and maybe think of some ways that you can up the challenge level on it a little bit for the future. Or on the flip side, you might realize that this is way too challenging for your child and you need to put it away and come back to it at a later time. So that observation piece is very important. And you can't really observe your child and his natural reactions unless you are making a concerted effort to not interrupt what it is that he's doing. So you're really going to try to have to step back, and even if you see your child making mistakes or not doing it exactly the way that you did, that's okay. You have to sit on your hands, you have to close your mouth, you have to avoid offering any type of correction or even any type of praise in the moment. Your child doesn't need any of that. You just have to observe, sit back, and bite your tongue. Oftentimes, parents are worried that if they don't jump in to correct their child right then and there in the moment, that their child is not going to learn. And in reality, with enough time and patience and practice, a child is going to self-correct. They're going to figure out how to refine their movements and control their movements so that they can move a lot more slowly and carefully. They are going to figure out what the sequence of the different steps is to the activity, even if they have to learn what each of those steps is one at a time. They are eventually going to learn how to pick up the different pieces and put them back into the tray and clean up after themselves. It just all takes time. It doesn't happen in one presentation. It doesn't even happen in several presentations. For many children, especially depending on their age, it's going to take a while, a lot longer than you might anticipate. So you just have to be patient. You also have to allow your child time to engage with the activity for as little or as long as they want to. Sometimes we are going to miss the mark a little bit. We're going to give our child an activity that perhaps isn't quite that interesting to them, even though we think it's interesting, and they may wander away after just a minute or two. But there are going to be other times that your child might be completely engaged with the activity, and they'll sit there for 10, 15, 20 minutes just working with that one material completely focused. And that is your goal. That is what you want to see your child doing, is engaging in deep concentration and engagement with the material. Because when you see them doing that, you know that you've really found something that meets a developmental need that they have. So again, do your best after you've handed the reins over to your child to just observe what they're doing and try not to interrupt. And if possible, some children, depending on their age, may not be 100% comfortable with this, but maybe even physically remove yourself. You can kind of sit back a little bit, or maybe even get up and go to a different part of the room to give your child a chance to completely explore on their own terms. If your child is younger and you know that they still need that emotional security of your closeness, your proximity as they're playing in order to stay focused, then by all means stay where you are so that you don't break their focus. But as they do become accustomed to playing more independently and concentrating on things, do make it your goal to eventually remove yourself entirely from their exploration so that they can have that time to themselves. And the fifth guideline is allow time for repetition. When you see your child going back to the shelf and pulling the same activity off over and over again, or they're playing with the same toy in the same way over and over and over again, that is a good thing. You want your child to engage in that repetition, because Dr. Montessori recognized that that repetition is key to the child's growth. A child needs this practice. They need to repeat something that is calling to a developmental need they have over and over again until they feel as if they have mastered it. So what that translates to for you is that when you are considering which types of activities to put out on the shelves for your child, or if you are engaging in a rotation of different activities from things that you have in storage, you do not want to get rid of any activities that you have seen your child very recently engaged in, even if it's something that's been out for months at a time. If your child still continually goes back to that activity or toy and selects it from the shelf, then your child still needs it. It is still serving a purpose, and there is no reason to get rid of it. And one other thing about repetition, something that Dr. Montessori recognized was this very peculiar phenomena that after a certain amount of repetition, a child would suddenly begin using the materials in different, more creative ways, maybe comparing materials or combining related materials in some certain way. And this is something that is developmentally normal and not to be concerned about, as long as your child is not misusing the materials.
Watch a lot, guys. It's not working. Now you do.
Let me reset it so that you can turn. Okay. Now you have a turn opening the locks.
It's a really hard activity.
Would you like me to show you how to position the key?
Maybe I should try another one.
Okay.
Instead. This key's in the... Maybe another key. This is the last key, and it should fit. Uh-oh, it's not the right key. I think this was the right key.
Is it all the way in?
But I did it.
You did.
I think this is too easy. I think the activity is too easy.
Have you tried the other ones?
Look, Mommy, it would say the faucet this way.
It looks like a kitchen faucet, yes.
See, this is the port. See, this is the shaping port, and this is the water trap, or the water comes out.
Mm-hmm.
This one now, and you try to unlock this one.
Remember, this is the one I had to pull up on the latch once I unlocked it. It didn't pop open like the other one.
Can't do it.
Twist it the other way and try again.
Can't do it still.
Did you twist it all the way? There you go. Now try.
Perfect. But this one should have seen faucet too. I can't do it. The T. That can't get the T out.
Does it need to be twisted another way to get it out? Try both ways.
Can't do it this way. So I can't do it this way. I just did it. And it just ended out this way.
Did you twist it all the way?
I still can't get it out.
You gotta twist it both directions all the way and try both ways. There you go. If it doesn't work one way, then twist it back the other way and try. There you go.
Like both of them with the sink faucets.
Okay.
Both of them with the sink faucets. Let's try and put it in.
Try putting it straight in.
But the vat doesn't work for straw. It works for straw.
Why don't you try relocking them? Get them
Oh.
closed again.
Okay. For next time. I want this one like this. But this would be a hot suitcase. It would be a hot thing that you fit. I think that's too easy. Now we need for this key to unlock, to relock this one. Mommy, I'm trying to do this one, and it seems like it wants to this direction, but this keeps twisting the other way.
I think the key needs to be out of it to relock.
See, it is what's like that, and it doesn't make any sense because when they put the tea in it doesn't work, and they put fried flesh on it doesn't work either.
Did it work that time?
Nope, see? It is comes back out again. Every time.
Push it in. Let's see. Here.
See, it comes back out. Pop out!
You're right.
That's weird.
Let's see. Oh, it just had to be pushed a little harder. That's all.
I mean, I'm not ready for this one yet. I'm ready for the other two ones.
Okay. Now, because children are children, things don't always go according to plan, and that's okay. And so I have a couple of different troubleshooting scenarios that I know are bound to come up for at least some of you at some point. And so I wanted to address them up front. This way you kind of have an idea of what to do should you find yourself in a particular situation. So the first is, what if I sit down to present my child with an activity and they're just not interested? The short answer to that is it's okay. If they're not interested, then that's your cue that perhaps the activity that you selected is just not meeting their current interests or developmental needs, or maybe it's too easy, maybe it's too challenging. There's a whole slew of reasons for what it could be, but if your child's not interested, then it's okay. There's no need to force them into trying the activity against their will, because that's not going to be fun for them or for you. So your best avenue is to just put the activity away, and you can try to introduce it again in the future at a much later time when maybe they're a little bit older or their interests have changed, and maybe at that point then they would be willing to give it a try. The next is, what if I present an activity to my child and they do start to engage with the activity, but then after a minute or so, they just kind of give up and wander away? And if that happens, honestly, it really depends on why they wandered away. If they just seem to have become uninterested or bored and decided it wasn't for them and wandered away, then I would defer to my previous answer that maybe they're just not ready for it and you should put it away for a later time. But if there was a very clear reason as to why they wandered away, perhaps their concentration was broken by a barking dog or some loud noise that they heard, or perhaps you stepped in to correct a mistake they made, or maybe you offered a little tiny little bit of praise because you couldn't help yourself and you said, "Oh, good job, you got it." Maybe that was enough to break their concentration and they are interested in it, but they decided in that moment they didn't want to continue, and so they wander away. If that is potentially what happened, then I personally would leave the activity out for them to come back to on their own terms again in the future. And then I would try to keep tabs and see what it is that they're doing with it the next time they begin to engage with the activity, to then determine if they truly are interested in it or not. And if they don't ever come back to the activity after you've put it on the shelf, then that's a pretty big red flag that they're not interested. And again, I would just put it away and try again another time. Next up is, I presented an activity to my child, but they clearly didn't understand what to do. If this happens, then it is very likely that your child is just not developmentally ready for that activity yet. And again, you need to put it away and reintroduce it at a much later time in the future when they've gotten a little bit older. The next one is, what do I do if I'm in the middle of presenting the activity to my child and they just can't wait and they jump in and they take over before I even get a chance to finish? The answer to this one is going to be dependent on your child's age. If you're presenting the activity to an infant or a very young toddler, then you have to be aware that their attention span and their ability to wait and watch you do something is incredibly short, possibly even only a few seconds. Especially if the activity is something that looks really exciting to them, they're going to want to jump in as an impulse, and they're not really going to be able to control that impulse. So if that happens, it's okay. Just let your child jump in and explore the materials a little bit. As long as they're not making a huge mess or using the materials inappropriately, it's perfectly fine to allow them to explore a little bit, have them help you clean up the materials when they're done. You can put it back on the shelf, and then the next time you offer them another presentation and you ask them to watch you again. And eventually, as they get older, their ability to wait will lengthen and you will be able to get through an entire presentation. happen. But just expect that with children, infants, young toddlers, it's really not a realistic expectation to sit there and expect them to wait for you to finish before they're able to jump in and get started using the materials. Now with an older child, let's say roughly around 2.5 to 3 years old and older, they most certainly should be able to sit there and watch you give a presentation before they jump in to handle the materials. However, if this is new for them, you might find that out of excitement, they might do that in the beginning, but as they become accustomed to this process of you giving them a presentation before they try something, then their ability to wait will eventually lengthen as well. Another really big one is, what do I do if my child becomes really frustrated with the activity? And in a Montessori environment, your approach should always be to offer only as much help as they need and as little help as necessary. And what that means is that you're not jumping in to solve the problem for them. You're not jumping in with all the answers and saying, here, let me do it, let me fix this for you. Instead, you want to try to take a more indirect approach. Perhaps you go over to where they're working and you start asking them some leading questions. What were you trying to do? Oh, what did you already try? Oh, did you maybe try moving the piece like this? And see if you can ask them questions to help them move in the right direction all on their own without you physically really having to intervene at all. Sometimes all kids need is just a little nudge to get them going again, and then they're happy to continue the activity. Another strategy that you can try that works particularly well for older toddlers and preschoolers is to remind them that if they feel really frustrated, it's okay to take a break and come back to it when they're feeling a little bit more calmed down. And I will often even say this to my own daughter. I will tell her, you know, sometimes I get really frustrated when I'm working on something and I have to take a break and come back to it. You know, I do that sometimes too. And sometimes just her knowing that that's okay to do is enough for her to say, okay, take a break, and then when she comes back, she's rejuvenated, she's ready to tackle the challenge, and then she's able to complete the activity on her own. And if none of that is working and your child is still incredibly frustrated, then sometimes it's helpful to just say, do you want me to show you how I would do it? And if your child says yes, then you can sit down and show them how you would do it if you were them. And I would ask first before offering your child that kind of help, because sometimes as parents, we assume that our child is going to feel relieved if we jump in and save the day for them, when in reality, they might be frustrated, but also kind of enjoying the challenge on some level, and they don't want us to jump in and fix it all for them. They want the opportunity to figure it out for themselves, and we would never know that unless we ask. So it is important to be respectful and ask your child before you jump in and just take over. Another common question is, what if my child asks me for help after it's their turn? If your child is in the middle of working with an activity and they specifically break their concentration to make eye contact and say, can you help me with this? That's okay. There is nothing wrong with helping your child if they are specifically asking for your help. Again, as we already said, try to offer them as little help as they need, but do offer them help if they request it. And perhaps the biggest concern that parents have is, what do I do if my child starts making a mess with the materials or otherwise using the activity inappropriately? Sometimes a parent will come to the mistaken conclusion that because they're not supposed to interrupt their child while they're working on the activity and exploring the materials, that this means that they're not supposed to intervene at all, even if the child is doing something completely inappropriate with the materials, like pouring something all over the floor or throwing pieces of the activity all over the place. They are children. They are most likely not engaging in these types of behaviors to make you angry, although they might laugh if they see you getting upset because they think your reaction's funny. They're not trying to make you angry. They're just exploring. They're testing the limits. They're saying, whoa, look at that giant mess I just made by throwing that across the room. How cool is that? It's more about an exploration for them. But that doesn't mean that it's okay. So they need you as the adult to help them understand what is acceptable and what's not. And so you need to set a limit when you see that type of behavior happening to help communicate that boundary to them. And the way to do that is very simple and respectful. There's no need to be mean or yell or scold and punish them for misusing the materials. Again, they're just exploring, they're young children. What you can do is intervene to stop the behavior in its tracks. Physically, even if necessary, reach out with your hand and stop their hand. If they're about to throw a handful of beans or whatever it is that they're doing, physically stop them and say, I can't let you do that. The beans need to stay inside of the tray. And if your child understands this and they're able to follow through on that and keep the beans inside the tray, then there's no reason that they can't continue the activity. But if your child continues to misuse the materials or make a mess, then they're sending you a very clear message that they're not ready for this activity quite yet. And so then it becomes your duty to say, it looks like we're not ready to keep the beans inside the tray today, so I'm gonna help you clean it up and we can try again another day. And then you follow through on what you said. You clean up the activity with your child's help if possible, and then you put it away and you wait to reintroduce it until a later time. So the bottom line is, whenever you are presenting a new activity to your child, if you can remember to always keep at the back of your mind that you should be following your child, which means that you're observing them and you're responding accordingly to help fulfill any needs or interests that they're expressing to you through their actions and through their play each day. If you can remember that, then it doesn't really matter what happens because you're always taking your cues from your child and you're allowing your child to show you what it is that they need going forward. If you're interested in learning more about how to implement Montessori practices at home with your children, I do offer a comprehensive e-course that walks you through it step by step. So I will be sure to leave a link in the description box down below if you're interested in learning more about that. And just in case you are new to my channel, I also wanted to let you know that this video is part of a much larger series on this channel called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori at home with their children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.